I can confirm that we can hear you.
Thank you very much. So thanks for this introduction, Andrea. And this is indeed the last of a series of sessions organized by Connected University and dedicated specifically to disinformation. Previous section had been looking to the definition of the phenomenon, its social and political implications, highlighting the seriousness of the threats that disinformation poses to our democratic societies, both within the context of electoral processes, but also outside such context. The recent infodemic that we have been assisting during the COVID crisis really demonstrates the risk, the dissemination, particularly online, of false narratives that in this case can seriously harm people's health and sometimes also undermine public health policies. So it is a serious issue. The Commission takes it as a priority. It will continue to be on the to-do list for the Commission in the next months and probably years, because this is not a problem that is going to disappear so quickly, but needs to be tackled in a very pragmatic way. And exactly looking at the pragmatic approach that the Commission, together with the Member States and with all the stakeholders concerned, has been pursuing during the last years, the other sessions of the Connected University dedicated to these themes have been looking at particular aspects of the actions taken to counter the phenomenon, to counter the threats. We have been talking about, in particular, the action plan on disinformation, which was a joint endeavor by the Commission and the External Action Services, which was published in December 2018. And since then, a number of other actions have been taken in order to bring forward a coherent strategy, capturing different fronts, from the fronts of the strategic communications and partnerships with international bodies and partners, like-minded countries, to strengthen cooperation with member states, in particular via the setup of a rapid alert system that provides the platform for member states to exchange experience, information, and coordinate responses to the disinformation threats. To continue with continuing development of the relationship with online platforms, which are the core of the storm when we talk about disinformation, including the implementation and monitoring of the code of practice on disinformation subscribed by the major online platforms, as you know, Google, Facebook, Twitter, Microsoft, Mozilla, and most recently TikTok joined the alliance together with the trade association representing the advertising industry to provide concrete actions based on commitments taken under the code of practice, and to continue with other actions which were also set up in the action plan from December 2018, aimed at strengthening societal resilience. And that is a very important theme. Citizens' awareness and societal resilience, it is key to fight disinformation. Hence, there had been last session devoted to media literacy. That is clearly one of the tools in our own toolbox that has to be fully harnessed in order to increase users' awareness and induce civic behavior online from the side of the users. Today, our session will talk about the role of fact-checkers, the role of researchers, and the role of media. Again, in the logic and in the perspective of increasing citizens' awareness and strengthening societal resilience towards this phenomenon. In this particular respect, the the role of fact checkers, which was a kind of a cottage industry at the beginning, and when I say the beginning, it's not such a distant past. It is only a couple of years ago. If one things are moving very, very quickly, but if you put it in historical perspective, we are talking about experiences that are just emerging. And fact-checking has emerged as a very important activity in this space, although at the beginning had to overcome certain, reluctances, certain doubts, and legitimate doubts. Fact-checking has been seen as a risky activity in terms of providing more oxygen to false narratives. So debunking could instead do the opposite, achieve the opposite result by giving more oxygen to stories that are deliberately disseminated online with the purpose of, confusing public opinion, distorting public, forming. Another objection was that in a context where public opinion it is shaped more by emotions than by an analytical approach towards facts and truth. The risk is to confront people with facts that are not vibrating in their own chords, and rather strengthen the confirmation bias of those extremist groups, for instance, that may be behind operations, information operations that pollute the information space. I believe personally, this is my belief, that these initial objections have been slowly but steadily overcome by the facts, by the fact that indeed the activities carried out by fact checkers have become increasingly prominent, and also important in relation to the actions that have been taken in parallel by online platforms. Now, if you look at the code of practice, many aspects of the code of practice and many actions that have been committed by the platforms are indeed relying on a solid fact-checking background work. Give some examples. If one of the objectives it is to demonetize websites that use disinformation as a way to attract eyeballs and therefore raise advertising revenues from the clicks that the audience make on their own impostors websites. Well, we need to have an idea of what are these websites and how they can be identified. If we talk about empowering consumers in order to enable them to have a experience online that it is enriching, that produce more knowledge, then you need to have system in place. And when I say system, I refer in particular, search algorithms and recommender systems that reflect the authoritativeness of the sources of information. And to do so, of course, the platforms need to have indicators, and these indicators comes from the research, from the activities, from the work that fact checkers do when they examine the trustworthiness and the credibility of the stories that circulate online. Very importantly, when you look at more complex and more dangerous operations, which are carried out by organized groups, sometimes driven from outside you, so like influence operations carried out by foreign countries. Well, what you need to have is a strict collaboration between fact-checking, so the debunking activity. It is an important first step in order to identify the origins of these information operations, and need to be connected with more in-depth analysis and research regarding the behaviors and the manipulative actions that are taken by those actors that harness the vulnerabilities of online platforms to amplify the reach of their own narratives. This points to the needs, in fact, to create more and more in the future, in my view, a connection between fact-checking and research. Everybody needs to understand better the phenomenon of disinformation. It is necessary, but probably not sufficient only to concentrate on the content and to the veracity of the facts. These elements need to be connected to a more in-depth analysis of the mechanism that shapes the spread and therefore the propagation of these narratives online, which require, in particular, access and good analytics based on data that the platforms have. And once again, the code and the role of fact checkers and researchers are two sides of the same medal, if you want. Because in order to carry out in-depth research, you need to have data. In order to have data, you need to have collaborations in place with online platforms that control these data. In that perspective, the Commission has also pushed forward for another important project, which is the European Digital Media Observatory, that aims at creating exactly the framework conditions for this cooperation to prosper in the future, to have an access point for data analysis that is based on a secure mechanism that protect privacy, but at the same time release meaningful data for journalists, for fact checkers, for researchers to carry out, in-depth investigations around the phenomenon. And also, the European Digital Media Observatory will provide, hopefully, a wonderful window of opportunity for media at large to intercept relevant information regarding the stories that deserve to be published and the angle under which the stories should be published, basically enriching the background information that it is at the basis of journalistic work. We know that this role of media today, it is very, very important. It's more important than ever. And the media, however, it is threatened by a difficult economic situation. So this has to remain very much always in the background of our own reflections. Pluralism is under attack, not only due to the mounting tendencies in many countries to restrict journalism freedom, attack journalism in certain cases, but also from the lack of sufficient resources for quality journalism to develop and prosper in the future. Hence, the need for an in-depth reflection about the mechanism that should be put in place and the support measures that should be designed to give a response, not only in the short term, now that the COVID crisis has hit so hard on the news media industry due to the collapse in advertising revenues, but also in the longer term in terms of stimulating investments that help the sector, I would say the media ecosystem as a whole, in a digital transition, and therefore to have the solid foundations and the necessary technological instruments to remain a competitive industry also in the future. Now, I would like to stop there with this too long introduction, because here we have a panel of 4 distinguished speakers that will discuss the points that I've briefly recalled now. And in this panel today, we have Corbin, who is the Deputy Director of Media and Head of News at EBU, European Broadcasting Union. We have Gregoire Lemarchand, who is the Deputy Global Editor-in-Chief at the AFP, headquartered in Paris, and is also responsible for the development worldwide of digital investigation and fact-checking in the AFP through the website factuel.afp.com. Then we have Marc Sundermann, who is currently is a senior fellow and project director at the Fondation EURACTIV, but he has a long career in the entertainment industry, and lately he was working for Bertelsmann as a senior vice president for government relations. And finally, Chiara Sigele, who is project coordinator for the European Data Journalism network, we also bring our own perspective, which is driven by her previous experience in the think tank Observatory Balkani and Caucasus Trans-Europa, who has been supporting freedom of information and quality journalism in Europe during the last years. So you see, we have today a representative panel of the media sector, of the fact-checking sector, even of the public broadcasting sector. And I would pass the floor now to Liz Corbin, who will present us her views around the theme of fake news and the role of public service journalism. Liz, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Paolo, and thank you for the introduction. It's my pleasure to be here today to discuss a topic which is just so very, very important. I often think about how historians will look back at this period, and I have no doubt that what we do right now will be having an immeasurable impact, not just on this generation, but on the future of information and how the truth is handled. So no pressure, everyone. To give you a bit more of an introduction about who I am and what I do, I am Liz Corbin. I've been a professional journalist for 19 years. 18 of those I was with the BBC in the UK and also in Singapore. And then this January I started at the European Broadcasting Union. I was looking forward to a great year of news. Every 4 years is what we call in the news industry the big one, particularly in Europe. It's when the European Football Championships, the Olympics, the US election all happen in the same year. Of course, we've actually lost 2 of those, so there's still 1 still to come. Hopefully it will happen. And this year also promised a big story with Brexit and a number of other big stories. What I didn't predict, and I don't think I'm alone here, was a global pandemic, which would fundamentally change how we work, our relationships with our fellow human beings, with our governments, and of course with the media. The phrase infodemic was born, and any thoughts I'd had of a settling in period were quickly abandoned. One of my many roles at the BBC was as the editor of their fact-checking service, Reality Check, and that is where my passion for this area of fake news was born. Now, I like to use the phrase fake news, and I promise it's not just to annoy all you academics in the room. I know very well that misinformation and disinformation are better descriptors, but I also like to speak in the language of our audiences, of the general public. I think it's really important that when we talk about protecting them from this scourge, that we also make them feel included, like they know what we're talking about. And I'm very curious about the variety of ways in which fake news can be tackled. There will be no vaccine against this infodemic, and there will be no cure. But before we move on and talk about the various weapons that we are finding effective, I just wanted to tell you a quick story about something which happened a few weeks ago to me. I was recently at an event where I was listening to a very senior, influential, powerful speaker, an expert in their field of the topic they were talking about. And he said something which I knew to be incorrect. But he's the expert, right? He should know. So, of course, I doubted myself. I had a quick Google search. I was right. What he'd said was incorrect. But by that point, the moment had passed. And in the whole scheme of things, this incorrect statement wasn't a major part of what he was saying. But it was something that you could imagine someone from the audience might repeat to somebody else afterwards, or that it might influence their view of the topic he was talking about. Now that's annoying, right? And to anybody who works in this area, it's very frustrating. I'm certain that it was unintentional and that he thought what he was saying was correct. A classic case of misinformation. And so the first point I want to make from this little anecdote is that people in influential and powerful positions need to be ultra careful. No speaking off the cuff, no throwing in facts that you think are true. And I think we all need to take responsibility for that. In some ways, though, what troubled me more was what happened after this incident. I told a few people what I'd heard and that it was incorrect, and they laughed. And, you know, I have a sense of humour, but I don't find that remotely funny, because I think many people working in this area know that fake news has an impact, and it can seem like a tiny impact at the time, but that then grows. And it showed to me that this attitude that fake news of the more minor variety isn't a big deal, just really shows the scale and complexity of our problem. I promise I will cheer up and talk about the positive things that we can do to make a difference, and that it's not just a lost cause. For those of you less familiar with the EBU, the European Broadcasting Union, we are most famous for the Eurovision Song Contest, but we are much more than that. At Eurovision News, we draw on the news gathering resources of more than 70 EBU members, sub-licensees, media partners worldwide. They share their news gathering content for use by the membership, and that news exchange has been sharing news content every single day since 1962. And that collaboration of the broadcasters goes further than just content. Throughout this pandemic period, we've been bringing members together to share their experiences and their advice with each other. And in particular, we've also brought together fact checkers from across all the members from all these different countries to share crucial information. Because, as I say quite a lot, it costs nothing to spread fake news, but costs a small fortune to counter it. As someone who's run a fact-checking team, I can absolutely testify to that. Many people, many journalists, in fact, think fact-checking is straightforward. You know, a politician says something misleading or outright incorrect, and you just correct it, right? Actually, it is that simple in about 1% of cases. And for the record, that is a completely made-up statistic, but you get the point. So choosing what you fact-check is absolutely crucial, because time is money, and there is no magic money tree in journalism. There are also a number of other factors to take into account when deciding when to use fact-checking against fake news, and Paolo just touched on some of that recently, just now. Research in this area shows that a lot of people, a lot of the time, when they read a fact-check, they remember the original claim, and they don't necessarily remember the verdict of the fact-check. Obviously, if your fact-check is the first time this person has come across this piece of fake news, this result is a disaster. Not only have you failed to counter the impact of the fake news, you've actually spread it. So you need to be confident that the fake news has gained sufficient traction in the public consciousness that by putting it out there again is not going to do more harm. And we've seen fact-checking also really improving over the past few years. The way stories are handled, the way they're headlined, the prominence of the conclusion over the prominence of the original claim or story, it is really, really important in removing this risk. But another risk with fact-checking is that you spend all of this effort on the fact-check and then fail to reach the people who believed the fake news in the first place. Because let's face it, when someone sees some fake news about COVID-19 in their Facebook feed, it's not necessarily the same type of feed which is going to deliver a fact check by a quality news organisation. Now, the responsibility for making sure this does happen is, I believe, is shared. Public service media undoubtedly need to do a better job at reaching all audiences by creating content which appeals to those that they're underserving on the platforms where these people are. And we are making huge efforts in this area. But also the social media platforms need to prioritise quality news content from quality news brands, making it more accessible to everybody and more visible. So I have mentioned the social media platforms, so let me spend a few minutes talking about them. They have quite literally changed our lives, haven't they? Transformed how we access information, how we communicate with each other. And they're no longer startups. They are among the most valuable companies in the world. They've been around a while. You know, public service media organisations, on the other side, are quite rightly held to account, regulated, and required to take responsibility for the privilege of holding their important positions in society. That cannot be said yet for the platforms, and yet they now influence the knowledge and emotions of billions of people. The EU, along with many others, is of course looking at how to respond to this, and we at the EBU will be contributing to that conversation. It's our view that the voluntary system of self-regulation is too weak and needs to be strengthened. One area being explored is a collaborative approach. The Trusted News Initiative was set up last year. Some of you may be familiar with it. It brings together global news organisations and the major digital platforms. So far, the network has been focusing on the most serious forms of disinformation. It's been targeting elections and most recently the COVID-19 period. They're also going to be, have just announced that they will be looking at the US election later in the year. The network allows for the speedy sharing of information so that action at a very high level, so that action can be taken very quickly. And I wanted to give you an example of how it has worked in the past few months. So as you will remember, the British Prime Minister was sick, very sick in hospital with COVID-19, and an imposter Twitter account popped up pretending to be a BBC News account. And it tweeted that Boris Johnson had died. Was the BBC that spotted this and moved very quickly to send an alert to this Trusted News Initiative network. That meant Twitter was on it quickly, the tweet was removed, the account was removed. It was a really dangerous piece of content if it had spread, but because of the quick action created by the network, it was down very quickly and did not spread as far as it might have done. This type of collaboration obviously cannot deal with the vast amount of content that's out there, but it does show that some of the most dangerous content can be dealt with quickly. Now, the platforms have been queuing up during this pandemic to tell us about what they've done to remove posts and accounts which are violating their standards and spreading dangerous or harmful content. The numbers they quote are big and they sound very impressive. It would be very churlish of me to suggest that their efforts have not had some impact, but we don't really know what that impact has been. Now, Paolo's just referenced this. Without access to their data, it is impossible for us to independently verify how successful their initiatives are. So in future, we would like to see more transparency from the platform so that they can be held to account properly, and not just after the event. In order to tackle fake news as it happens, journalists really need information in real time from the platforms to know what's happening and the scale of it. We can't tackle what we can't measure. So again, we need more collaboration. One of the reasons that platforms are so successful is that we create our own experience without even realizing it. The algorithms and our own actions mean we see more and more of what we like, what we agree with, what reflects our own views. By definition, public service media exists to provide a wide range of views and perspectives, and we believe that's a good thing. We would like to see the platforms taking plurality more seriously, to be able to provide their users with a broader experience and be exposed to more and different perspectives. Obviously, everybody here at this session today is very smart, very knowledgeable about fake news. You know what to look out for. You're likely to be less susceptible than others, perhaps, but I bet your guilty secret is that you've fallen for something. The fact is, it's not just young people we need to educate or the over 60s. It's all of us, you know, even journalists, especially journalists. At Eurovision News, we have a service called Flashlight. We connect up, as I said, we connect up the fact checkers from our members so they can share stories and information about fake news. And this allows them to alert each other to fake content so they don't have to do that work twice. But it's not just to save people time, it's also to protect others from falling into the trap. The fact is, it is easy to do. Everybody's human. They can also share things they've found to see if anyone in any other organisation or country can help assist them with verification. Again, collaboration's really a theme in this fight against fake news. And earlier I spoke about the responsibilities of people in power. These are generally the people most vocal against fake news and the people who should be championing trusted public service journalism. Instead, some of them are at the front of the queue, throwing insults and abuse at public service journalists. And when you throw enough mud, eventually it sticks. In this pandemic, many of these leaders have depended heavily on the public service media to deliver crucial, fact-based public health information. But when this crisis ends, will they remember why they should protect public service media, or will they go back to throwing mud again? There's 2 points here. Firstly, when we call for action against fake news, we need to remember that sweeping powers can be misused. We're already seeing this in many countries around the world, and even here in the European Union. So while we support efforts to suppress fake news, we must be really cautious and make sure that freedom of speech, pluralism is protected. And secondly, public service media is only as good as its funding. So it's all very well politicians speaking up for it, but they need to put their money where their mouth is. The investigations, the explainer videos, the fact checks, breaking news alerts, they all need reliable funding. Some fake news is apparently immune from fact checking. I'm sure you've all seen the posts about cures or things you can do to stop yourself getting COVID-19. You know, gargling hot water every 15 minutes, drinking camel urine. That was a video on YouTube for months. There is no end to this fake news. So what's to be done about this type of fake news? As I've mentioned, you can warn everybody about this sort of content. More media literacy initiatives, I genuinely believe you can't have enough of them. But this content is there for a reason, because people are desperate for answers, for information. There is a demand, and this content is filling that gap, which quality journalism should be filling. So we need large volumes of trusted, accurate content that public service news organisations produce, and which they produce at a price. It's expensive. As long as publicly funded media has existed, there's been an argument that it should be left to the market, that compulsory licence fees or taxes are unfair, that people should have a choice what they pay for. But let's just pause for a moment to reflect on what is happening right now. Advertising revenue has gone through the floor. Journalists are losing their jobs everywhere you look. If you just look at the US, which, unlike Europe, does not have the same tradition of universal publicly funded media, and look at the carnage in local journalism there. Now, there are whole areas of the country where local government and communities have no journalists covering them or holding officials to account. No publication, no broadcaster, no journalists, no one. And that wasn't caused by the pandemic. The business model of commercial journalism, which has survived for decades, has been massively disrupted by the digital advertising. The percentage of global ad revenue going to the major platforms is eye-watering, leaving news organisations from the big to the tiny, little more than crumbs. We know how important it is for people to be able to trust in the media they consume, and competition in the market helps keep everyone at the top of their game. The survival of all public service newsrooms, however they are funded, is absolutely crucial. And we need to prioritise this. I began by explaining why I use the term fake news. I'm going to conclude by explaining why I think how we speak about this issue is so important, because no one likes to be made to feel that they need to be educated, that they're stupid or they're a fool for believing something that they've read. They deserve more respect than that. They have direct access to information now. They don't need to be told what to think by someone they are told they should trust. The public don't need to be told what is real and fake. They need to be able to see things for themselves. And for that, they need easy access to news from reliable, trustworthy sources. And that's why public service media is so important in this fight against fake news. Thank you.
Very good, Liz. Many thanks for this very comprehensive and passionate, actually, intervention. I'm looking at the slide of questions, and there is one in particular that I think it is very appropriate for you to reply. Somebody asks that, and it's a bit also your anecdote that you referred to us before, although these refer to journalists, they say, the question is, some journalists are spreading fake news as well. How, therefore, can we differentiate between quality, independent journalists, and the rest? And who should do it?
Yeah, there's two things there, Paolo. Thank you. It's a good question, and thanks for picking it from the slide out. It's when you say journalists are spreading fake news, I did touch on this briefly. Obviously, then there's a difference between whether it's being spread deliberately or accidentally, and this is why investment in journalism is so important. Training journalists to make them less at risk of doing this accidentally, but also the resources to be able to have to properly fact check all of the information and sources that they're using. Now, quality news organisations spend a lot of money on this and have various procedures in place to make sure that they are double sourcing information, properly verifying and checking everything. And occasionally mistakes are made, and then it's really, really important that those organisations own up to those mistakes, acknowledge them and correct them. And because of the way that they're regulated and the mandate they have in terms of public funding in many cases, you know, they are obliged to do that, and that's a very healthy part of the system. Where you have journalists deliberately spreading misinformation, I would argue they have no place in a respected news organisation. But you then need to be clear about which news organisations we're talking about. So if it's in terms of political misinformation or disinformation, you can get into many discussions about that. But the unintentional spread of fake news by journalists is an issue which needs to be tackled by investment.
No, absolutely. I know, Liz, that in about 20 minutes you will have to go. So I profit of your presence to ask you another question.
No, I'm fine until just before the very end of the session.
Okay, very good. Good to know. But anyhow, I will ask you in any event this question because you evoked in your speech the importance of data. And here we have a question asking whether you could elaborate more around what type of data would be necessary, what you mean in practical terms with access to data. That is an interesting question. I think if you could provide some examples of data that can be actually useful.
So this has two aspects really. One of them is around being clear about what is effective in preventing the spread of fake news. So, when I've spoken at a number of events where you hear also from the platforms who will tell you about the millions and millions of posts and accounts that they've closed during this period, and and what they've done to suppress various amounts of content. What we don't know is we have no independent or academic research which has shown how effective that has actually been and how that has affected users and whether that has actually had a big impact. And that, I think, will be incredibly useful, because with that information you can then see how you should approach the next big wave of fake news, and to be able to hold, as I say, hold these very powerful companies to account. So data in that respect and access for independent research, I think, is really crucial. But that is kind of an after the event situation. Within the event, this is where we get into how we stop fake news in real time. So being able to know how quick, because we all obviously have different feeds and different access to the information. And we see things very differently depending on who we are and what our profile is. So being able to understand whether a piece of content which we see on our feeds is everywhere, whether it actually is everywhere or whether it's just within our network, or the things that we're missing because they're going exploding in somebody else's network and not within what we're looking at. So being able to get that real-time assistance is something that is being discussed, and I hope will be something that we could develop in collaboration with the platforms in future.
Thank you very much. I guess we are referring here to the need to have a better view of the way that disinformation narratives propagate. It's a little bit like a virus, right? If you want to contain a pandemic, you need to know where it is actually influencing people. So you need to identify the fires, where the fires is, and then to contain it. And for that, you need indeed data that enable a tracing of the propagation patterns of specific narratives around the different platform services. And that, I think, will give a nice transition to the next speaker, who is Gregoire Lemarchand. As I said before, Gregoire is heading the fact-checking activities within the AFP, and will tell us today about how the AFP Global Fact-Checking Network is covering the infodemic on COVID-19. Actually, your presentation, Gregoire, will also reply to one of the questions we have received from the audience, whether we have or not an overview of which are and how many false narratives have been shared during the pandemic. So this is straight on your topic. The floor is you, Gregoire.
Thank you very much, Paolo. Yes, I'm going to propose you a more in-depth look about what we've done and what we are still doing, unfortunately, because this is not the end of the pandemic, of what we're currently doing to cover disinformation around the COVID-19. Just an introduction, I just want to say that, ever since I started doing fact-checking a little over 3 years ago, when I'm tired of seeing false information popping all the time and everywhere, when you're fed up with being harassed by trolls, you think to yourself, but what's the point? Why I am doing this? And every fact checker already asked himself that questions many times. I have no doubt about this. Why I'm doing this? With the pandemic and everything that has happened in the last 6 months, I no longer have any doubts. And I've never felt our daily work so useful. And for example, we've received so many questions, inquiries coming from people, coming from the audience, so many solicitations on all platforms. And just to give you an example, we've received so many compliments and positive feedbacks about our work too. You can see here a few examples in French on the screen with tweets, but we've also received very positive feedbacks on our WhatsApp channels, on Facebook, through emails or messages on our website. And this is really important to answer the question, why I am doing this? Am I relevant? And when you have this kind of messages, you feel really better. And, just one figure to illustrate this too, that our website traffic has increased by almost 140% compared to last year. And, AFP has published as many fact checks during the first 6 months of 2020 with the pandemic as during the entire of 2019, and so it's really a big deal. Maybe you don't know, but we are lucky because we have quite a lot of fact checkers at AFP, working in 37 countries on all continents, and you can see the bullets on the map. And we are publishing in 15 languages. And all these fact checkers, all these 86 journalists working on our fact checking networks, they never felt so useful also. And really feeling useful, is our natural fuel, our main motivation as fact checkers. So I won't go too deep into details, but just to give you an idea of our situation in Europe, we are working in France, naturally, but also in Spain, publishing both in Spanish and Catalan, in Poland, in Czech Republic, Slovakia, Netherlands, Belgium, and Serbia. And we are planning to publish soon in German from Berlin and Vienna. So here is our global network, and I will explain you after, or is it important and relevant and so useful for our fact-checking activity during the pandemic. Sorry, I have two screens, so sometimes, yes, okay, sorry. So we've published, which is, I said before, it's a big deal. We've published, as you can see, 464 fact checks. Sorry, mainly in English and Spanish, then in French, and also you can see the details if you're interested. So it's in all the languages we're publishing, and from January till now. And I just really want to stress that our global network has never been as meaningful and useful as it is with the coronavirus. Everyone benefited from the work and expertise of their colleagues. Usually our fact checkers working in Thailand, for example, don't necessarily have much connection with those working in the United States or in Netherlands or South Africa, for example. But with false information jumping from one country to another so quickly, we have never needed each other more. Under normal circumstances, local stories concentrate most of the fact-checking work. But with the coronavirus, everything's changed. Every story, every meme, every photo or video was likely to become viral anywhere in the world. So the relationship between all our journalists, with about 40 nationalities and as many cultures and different generations and experience, has become stronger and better. There was a lot of activity on our common Slack. I'm sorry, I'm doing a little bit of advertising here, but Slack is very useful when you're working with so many people all across the world. So there was a lot of activity on our common Slack, and what makes me happy as a chief is that never a message went unanswered on our ask for help channel. If you know Slack, there is a lot of you can work with channels. And I really like, for example, when we fact check a viral video in Burma, it was supposed to talk about the health situation in Ecuador, whereas the video was shot in Germany and has nothing to do with COVID-19. So there is Burma, Ecuador, and Germany. And so it's a little bit complicated. But our fact checker in Yangon, in Burma, quickly set the record straight with the help of his colleagues in Sydney, Hong Kong, Paris, and Berlin. So it shows how the collaboration is essential. And as the COVID-19 reached progressively every continent, having people fluent in Chinese, Italian, or Portuguese was very helpful, of course, allowing us to respond as quickly as possible to misinformation. And for example, in France, we were able to debunk viral false information very quickly because the work had already been done by our colleagues in Australia or Chile or Colombia, where the hoax had appeared earlier. But we saw many people working. With so many people working across all the time zones, most of them remotely, and it hasn't always been easy to organize. But I think we managed to do it with only minor bugs from time to time. And of course, being able to quickly translate stories and adapt them to the local context was extremely valuable to us. Some of our fact checks have been adapted as many as 9 times, from the most widely spoken languages in the world, like English, Spanish, or Arabic, to more local languages, such as Malay or Slovak. And around COVID-19, it was the fact check stating that gargling warm salt water or vinegar does not prevent coronavirus infection, which is our number 1. And you can see on the screen, this is the same fact check, which was very viral in many countries and part of the world, which was first done in French, then translated in 9 different languages very quickly. But we had also the same situations about some other content that you may have seen on your on Twitter or on your news feed on Facebook. There was also one with an alleged video of the Wuhan market, but it was not the Wuhan market. It was a market in Indonesia, as well as something very viral in Europe, telling that it was a rumor claiming that Cristiano Ronaldo, was going to convert hotels into hospitals for the COVID patient. But more generally, despite our strong international network, we also believe that we have an interest, and Liz told about this before previously, that we have an interest in joining forces with other fact checkers, with other media. And what happens to AFP in the fact checking community is that we all pursue the same objective, informing as accurately as possible without scoop hunting and merciless competition. And this is not always the case when you're talking about journalism. Collaboration is not natural among media, among journalists, but in the fact-checking community, it is. So I think it's very important to stress that. And here is on the screen, you can see an example of what we did. It was a report we've done with I think the main fact checkers in the 5 European countries that were the most affected by the pandemic. So it was Maldita in Spain, AFP of course in France, Full Fact in the United Kingdom, Pagella Politica in Italy, and Corrective in Germany. So it's not so easy to work together, to work remotely. We've done a lot of calls, but we've done these reports, and we've highlighted, for example, what were the common hoaxes between the country, what were the main narratives about the false claims around the COVID, talking, for example, as you can imagine, about Bill Gates or about the 5G. And we've seen so what we have in common among the countries, where the hoax appeared first and then jumped to one country, from one country to another. And we've seen also what are the most local stories and false information in those five countries. Honestly, it's not perfect. It's not an academic report. It's not exhaustive, but we really hope that this kind of work can provide a relevant research base for researchers in the future, and a good example of what can we do in terms of collaboration. So let's talk about collaboration, but collaboration with the platforms, and it's something really important, of course. So let's talk about what's being done with the platforms. It's not a small subject. Of course, more generally, platforms can do really better. But at least they're doing something now. In 4 years, we have gone from denial, a complete denial, to really closer exchanges, and at times, collaborations, more or less large and effective. But at least they exist. I think that the platforms have now understood that to combat, to fight the spread of disinformation, technology won't solve everything. Far from it. Technology is not enough. And maybe technology can help, can make possible to go faster, but the human eye, the journalist, the fact checker will always remain fundamental in the process. So let's talk about one example I know very well. It's what we're doing with Facebook, with the Facebook third-party fact-checking program. So Facebook works with more than 60 independent fact-checkers all around the world. All of them are certified by the International Fact-Checking Network, the IFCN, which is based in the United States, but we a completely independent network run by a Turkish journalist. It's just linked to the Poynter University, but it's fully independent. Now, IFP is Facebook's main fact-checking partner through this program. And what it is really important, and I want to highlight this, is AFP fact checks are posted on Facebook, Instagram, and WhatsApp, and really help to stop the spread of disinformation, of misinformation on these platforms. Liz highlights before that we need to be sure that the debunking, the fact-checking are reaching the people that are consuming fake news and disinformation. And I think what it is interesting in this program is our debunks, our fact checks are attached to the false information. I won't say that it's solving everything, but this is something really important and really interesting in order to reach the people that are affected by disinformation. And I also want to stress, and this is really, really important, that we have 100% of editorial control on this. Facebook is not asking us to do more of this, less of that, or to not cover this or this. We are fact-checking and writing what we want and what is relevant for us. And we are also not moderator. We are not asking Facebook to remove some contents. We are doing some fact-checking and our role is, we are journalists, we are not moderators. So maybe some of you already know that, but just want to give you a quick overview of how it works. So if AFP or another media partner of the third-party fact-checking program rates an article as false, so Facebook will first reduces the visibility of the post by 80%. So you won't see, the post will will be demoted in all the newsfeed of the users. The fact checks show up as related article below the post in the newsfeed, and you can see on the example on the left. So you have the article connects related article in French attached to the false publication, and there is also a gray filter, a gray layer on the publication, saying, okay, this is a false information verified by independent fact checkers. So if you want to know more, just click on it, and I will show you afterwards how it works. Notifications are sent to the people who have already shared the post, and also you have a warning like this one with the button Découvrez pourquoi appear if you try to share the content. You still can share the content. There is no censorship, but there is this warning. And page administrators of pages that have shared misinformation are also advised. And which is also important, and Paolo talked about that before, pages and sites and websites which regularly spread false information see their visibility downgraded, and repeat offenders are banned from monetizing the content on the platform. This is interesting. This is important because, as you know, there are a lot of false information, misinformation coming from clickbait websites. So if you touch them with the money, it's really more efficient. So how it works? Here is a false information you can see on your news feed. So there is the gray layer. There is the button if you want to know more. So you just click on it, and you will have a pop-up inviting you to say to have a look on the fact check. And if you don't want to have a look, and if you still want to share the false information, you can do it too. And I think it's important because we are not moderator, and we are not, as I said before, and we are not here to ban the content and to censor it. And one last thing. And it's still the same idea to be effective, to reach the right people, to reach the people affected by this information. It's really important to think about the formats, and so that's why we're trying to develop new formats in order to reach more people. Sometimes fact check are too long. You know, stuff with hyperlinks, with maybe too many screens grabs. Maybe sometimes people say, okay, you're doing a great job, but this is really, really too long. And so we're trying new formats. And just two examples. So we've done a series of educational video during the pandemic, 5 episodes about hoaxes that were widely shared in France about the COVID-19, and the videos were about 3 minutes long, but it was quite a good success with a bit more than 3 million views. And we're also developing more and more stories on Instagram, and there is it's quite successful, and we want to do more, and we are now thinking about doing some stuff too on TikTok. So we always need to think how we can reach more people with our debunks. And thank you very much for your time, and that's it for me.
Thank you very much, Gregoire, for this very interesting presentation, very down to earth, very practical, and very also reconforting, because it is nice to hear that there is 140%, roughly 140% increase in the attention paid to fact-checking, as you could measure it on your own service. You have already, by the way, captured certain questions that were coming from the audience, who were asking for the type of hoaxes circulated during the campaign, during the the pandemic, and also the importance of international collaborations. I think you went straight on this point, and with a case that prove effectively the importance of being able to work in a network, and therefore to anticipate stories that may come from somewhere else through appropriate collaborations with colleagues that have been confronted with certain narratives before. And disinformation, as everybody knows, is global, it's a global phenomenon, knows no borders, and therefore collaborations between fact-checking organizations is extremely important. But I would have personally one question for you. When you mentioned the positive experience you have been having with Facebook and the collaboration directly with Facebook. Of course, not all platforms have the same type of model when it comes to collaborating with fact-checking, or they have no model at all in place. What would be, in your view, an ideal situation in terms of extending cooperations with other platforms, but also with other fact-checkers? It goes two ways. Have you given some thoughts about models for cooperation between fact-checking organizations and platforms in general?
So I give you the example of the Facebook third-party fact-checking program, which is the oldest one, maybe the first one. As I said, it's not absolutely perfect, but at least it exists and it's growing, and I think it's now efficient. Of course, we need to do more with other platforms. Just to be honest, we have not only us. I mean, we as the fact-checking community have also some talks and a lot of talks with Google, for example, and also Twitter. But we really need to do more, and I'm thinking that I think there is a big can I say in English, there is a big platform where there is almost nothing, and where disinformation is spreading very quickly is YouTube. And I think we really need to do more with YouTube on this platform. And I'm not saying the other one are perfect, but at least they're doing something. But we really need to do more on YouTube, and they need to understand. And that's why I said before that, most of the time they're thinking that training the AI, and they will find the right technology to delete disinformation on their platforms. And I think it's a big mistake to believe and to rely on a 100% technology solution. And that's why I'm thinking, and we're all thinking as fact checkers, that technology can be a big help, a really big help, and we all using it on a daily basis in our work. But they need to understand that they need human eye, they need fact checkers, they need journalists in order to clean their news feed, to clean their algorithm, because I mean, AI cannot guess everything, is not smart enough to detect the disinformation. And what is striking me, for example, is everyone is talking about deep fakes, and it's been now more than 2 years that people are saying, okay, deep fakes are coming, and there are a lot of startups and tech companies working on deepfakes. But when you're talking with fact checkers, on how many deepfakes are we working? Zero. I mean, if you want to, this disinformation is so easy to do with an out of context photo, with an out of context sentence. And now, they're funding tech companies to detect deepfakes, but there are no deepfakes about disinformation, because if you want to disinform, you don't need it. They are as the great Claire Waddell is saying, there are some shallow fakes, some cheap fakes, And I think that we really need to understand the fight against disinformation needs us, but don't need so much technology. And maybe I'm stupid, and in 2 years we will have a panel talking about the deep fakes that are I think ruining democracies around. But really, I don't know. But for the moment, there are no deep fakes in disinformation. There are some doctored video, there are some manipulated video, but you don't need it. So I think that the main challenge is to put some human, some fact checkers, some journalists to have more to clean the platforms, to clean the algorithm, to clean the newsfeed, you know. And at least we're doing it with Facebook, but that's not enough.
Yeah, many thanks. And to pick up on your example on YouTube, I would like to recall that YouTube has around 2 billion views per week worldwide, and 70% of these 2 billions, it is generated by the recommender system. It is not directed through the search, YouTube search, but comes as a recommendation from the algorithms that operates behind YouTube. So the importance of elaborating trustworthiness indicators that should feed into the working of these algorithms, give prominence to authoritative sources, and to dilute content which it is of more dubious origins, is indeed that would be the things to pursue in the future to improve the landscape. But I'm conscious of the time. We are at 3:15. And we have still 2 more speakers in our lineup. And I would now turn to Marc, who is an expert, of course, in the media and entertaining industry, and also has been very much involved in the past in the high-level group on disinformation, the discussion there. One of the issues exactly that came up quite forcefully in those discussions was how to elaborate in a multi-stakeholder setup objective trustworthiness indicators for news sources that could feed into the algorithm. So I make the transition from what you have just said, Gregoire, now to Marc, perhaps picking up on this theme, and also inviting Marc to address a question that comes from the audience that insists on this concern. The concern is that misinformation would only partly come from quality public-funded journalism. So would not be more important to ensure neutral reporting as a solution. Marc, I give you these 2 hints. Of course, you will elaborate in your presentations. If you could address in your presentation these 2 points, it would be great. Marc, the floor is yours.
Okay. So, hello everybody, thank you for having me first of all. And I'd like to start with the good news first for mainstream media, which goes for public and for private media in this time of Corona crisis. Actually, news consumption on these classical mainstream media has significantly increased. And this is actually quite interesting because the COVID-19 crisis was a very particular situation, because the starting point was actually nobody knew a lot about this virus when it all started. You had like mainstream media, and you had like social media at the same starting point at the end of the day. We all know that these media are all very much interlinked now. And what was very important, what Paolo said at the very beginning, was, of course, nobody is an expert in everything. So where do you go? You go where the trust is at the end of the day. And so what is, of course, essential for journalistic quality media, public and private, is, of course, as Gregoire said, there are journalists. And journalists have some work to do. There are particular something where public very quickly is attracted to, because they know it's checked news. It's like a fact-checking internal network already. So this is something which was quite important. Which made it quite interesting as well is, of course, the interlinkage between mainstream media and social media. More and more mainstream media articles are pitched via social media. Like on Twitter feeds where like articles are pitched, headlines, etc., etc. So this is actually all quite positive. The downside of this is obviously on the financial model, because quality journalism costs money. Is something that should not be taken for granted, is something which needs to be fostered. We have different financing models. I mean, you have the public financing model, which is important, but you have the private financing model as well, which is mainly advertising. And here comes then a bigger problem is the advertising is going there where the entry point is. So rather than going directly to those who are checking, who are doing the work, it goes to the entry points, which are the big platforms. So we saw a dramatic decrease in advertising income across the board. We saw on some media a clear raise in subscription, but this increase in subscription didn't make up for the loss of revenue otherwise. What we also saw is that there's a large variety of consumption of news, in particular with the younger generation. They are overwhelmingly going in the meantime on Instagram, WhatsApp, etc. And even, it was mentioned by Gregoire as well, even TikTok is becoming a source of news consumption. Which leads me to another point, is like, how do you make sense out of everything that is out there, in particular if you don't know exactly? I mean, these times fake news or disinformation online literally kill people, because if you get told on certain channels that you should drink bleach in order to fight the virus, it's not very helpful. Right? So there are real consequences. So I totally agree that fact-checking is super important in that case. The only thing with fact-checking that may be, I see two problems there actually. One is the speed of fact-checking. If you see on social media how quickly information is being spread and disseminated, which is also a strong challenge for mainstream media, because normally on mainstream media you only put information out there if it's checked, if you have verified it, but the pressure from social media is so strong that you need to keep up with it. So one thing is obviously speed, and the second thing is who is fact-checking the fact-checkers at the end of the day, because this was something we had in our high-level expert group discussions very prominently. We don't want to have like a ministry of truth. You can have different kind of newspapers. For example, I take now French newspapers, for example, like Libération or Le Figaro. I truly believe both are trustworthy sources, but they will have other points of views on certain issues without being fake. So the challenge will be there. How do you make sure that consumers or that readers or the general public at the end of the day has at least the trust that is so important to really trust those sources? So one thought that we're having obviously is to find some way which goes hand in hand with fact checkers and research, some kind of trust indicators at the end of the day. Meaning that at least it's being shown that these kind of information source has journalistic standards, and let's say, for example, an A grade or something like this. Another one who doesn't have a real track record, who cannot show that it's fact-checked, who cannot show that it's properly researched, will maybe have a C or so. You still can decide where you want to go. But this is at least something that could help to at least objectivize the choice without interfering with people and saying, by the way, this is the truth or this is the real fact. In particular, in the pandemic, you will see that many things that were facts at the very beginning weren't facts anymore a few weeks later and became facts again a few weeks later again. So in changing environment, you need to have something more neutral. Yeah, this is something which I think is really important there, and the role of platforms is of course central, because during this pandemic, yes, mainstream media has increased consumption, but the real winners in this pandemic were of course the bigger platforms. They gained traffic, they gained income, and there it's difficult to just say, well, their rules of terms of use will do it all. I mean, we have the international dimension. If we just take Europe, we have many different countries with many different legal systems. You have to make sure that they abide to the democratic rules in these countries. And voluntarily is nice, but a bit more constrained is nicer. Let's put it this way. So yeah, I maybe just stop here. For the time being, I could go on, but I think the role of news media in these times, not only for democracy, but also for the whole health system, remains really important and shouldn't be seen just as a something you can sell or you can deal with. It's not just a merchandising thing.
I was muted, sorry. Thanks you, Marc, for your intervention. I would have a question here just coming in that says that the study shows that 90% of misinformation remains online. And what should be the actions that the platform should take in this regard?
Well, I think, the platforms, today has been an interesting day anyway, because there has been the opinion of the Advocate General in the YouTube Sarah Brightman case. The question was to what extent YouTube should be responsible, or Ciando, another platform, for content that is illegally or wrongfully put on their side. And the Advocate General said, well, it's just a platform. They should not be responsible. It's not a judgment yet, but it's of course a first step, which exactly shows the problem. Usually if as a journalist, as a publisher, as a broadcaster, public or private, you put out something and it's wrong, you're responsible for it. This is why you check, this is why you verify, this is why you use everything you can do to make sure that it's not illegal, that it's well researched, that you can show that. If you don't have this obligation and you say, well, it's just the people posting and I'm the neutral structure, then of course it is difficult to say you have to be responsible. Then it comes back to the voluntary measures, and then it comes back to who is actually policing the platforms. Do they police themselves? They don't want to do this because they say, well, it's not really our role, which I can understand, but on the other hand, they're doing a significant amount of business with it. So, some more responsibility for what they're putting out via their platforms would be certainly helpful. Because I believe if you're responsible for something, you make sure that you don't break the rules or you don't break the laws.
Yeah, of course, it's always difficult to make somebody responsible for a content that has been created and posted by others. But probably there is something more to be looked at in terms of you are responsible to ensuring that your services are not so vulnerable for others to increase artificially the spread, the reach, to target people, use data in a wrong manner in order to have orchestrated campaigns that those indeed becomes impactful on public opinion. Perhaps we should start to think about distinguishing the content, the conduct. And the conduct, very often, it is the result of insufficient integrity in the platform services themselves. And for that, the platform should be held responsible. This is their own property, not somebody else.
I mean, what Liz said before in her intervention is really important, is the access to data of these platforms. This is something which is vital. We don't know how they are prioritizing or not prioritizing, how they are following the flows. If we don't know that, it's difficult to suggest something.
Very clear. Would you like to comment also on another question, which is a different, very much down to the nowadays stories, which is that The Guardian has and the CNN have just published an article pointing to the fact that the Russian state-sponsored hackers target COVID-19 vaccine researchers. How would you comment on it?
Well, I haven't read the article yet, this shows the whole this shows the whole dimension of what actually is going on there, and that it's that this whole disinformation issue is not only individuals using different kind of platforms to spread things. It's becoming really, well, I would not say cyber war, but maybe close to it anyway, to governments actively intervening and interfering in other countries via these sources.
Yeah. And if you look from the side of the users instead, there is a question asking, what is the right thing to do when we, as users, we spot a fake news? Is there any practical suggestion? I suppose the question point also to the whether or not the platforms have put in place sufficiently clear, easy, user-friendly procedures for the users to report and to be informed about the follow-up on their own complaints, possibly, I guess. Any views about the role of platforms when it comes to users spotting, false information or misleading information on their own services? What they should do?
Well, I mean, if you spot fake news or disinformation, it would maybe be helpful, maybe Gregoire can say more on this one, maybe it would be helpful to have like a flagging system, that there is some kind of banner or whatsoever that shows, oh, this has been signalized by certain people as being fake or not correct. I would, if I spot something that is fake news, it's like wrong information, and that's it. If I don't spread it, I don't spread it. If you want to objectivize it and quantify it, then of course there must be some interaction with the platforms. But maybe Gregoire has more on this one.
Yeah, Gregoire, if you want to step in, you have. You're muted. You're muted.
Is that okay now?
Fine, we can hear you very well.
Sorry. No, in the Facebook program there is now a.
No, you are muted again.
Okay, so I was saying that in the Facebook program I've described earlier. Facebook gave the fact checker a tools, which is still not sufficient, but which is very useful. where people that are maybe if as a user on Facebook you're seeing fake news or something that you suspect to be fake news, you can flag it to Facebook, and Facebook will send it to the fact checkers. I think, because I don't know all the details, that one signal of one user is not enough, because it would be too easy to game the system. But if there are enough flags coming from the users, the content will appear in the tool that Facebook gave us. And this is very interesting in order to spot as early as possible the disinformation. Just to give you an example, if you're doing some, as a fact checker, if you're doing some research on Facebook, you can research by words, by, for example, but you cannot, it's almost impossible to spot, for example, a photo, a meme, or a video spreading disinformation if there are no captions, or if if there is no text with the publication. And for example, and sometimes, for example, you have we've already seen video spreading disinformation with only emojis to attach to the false video. So it's impossible to find it by your own way. So you need to rely on the users, and we have a lot of inputs coming from the users, as I said at the beginning of my presentation, through WhatsApp or Messenger or mails. But with the tools given by Facebook, we are able to see that disinformation that is almost impossible to find by ourselves, because there are no keywords, there is nothing. So it's interesting, and there is also like a sudden signal. You know that one of the characteristics of disinformation, it's viral, and it's going viral very quickly. You know, so if there is something that goes very quickly viral, and something maybe you that have already just been posted, and 6 hours later there is already thousands of shares, it will be flagged to us. So many times it's irrelevant, because you have some cooking, you have cute cats, you have those kind of things that are viral, but you have also a lot of disinformation. So it's important in order to tackle as early as possible the disinformation. It's not complete, and we still need to have our own monitor of Facebook and other social media, but it's interesting when there is a possibility to flag the content. So I hope this kind of tool will be developed on other platforms like Twitter or YouTube, for example, because I think that, I'm not sure, but I think that if you, for example, if you flag something on many platforms, it will go to the moderators because they think that it's breaking the terms and conditions, but it's not related to disinformation. And sorry for my long answer.
No, it's very good. It's very good. That is an interesting takeaway also for me, thinking about the future. Actually, I don't know whether the technical problem that Chiara was facing, yes, apparently they have been solved in the meantime, and I would therefore go to Chiara, if she's ready with her slides, to ask her to intervene. In particular, looking at from her perspective, she's working in data journalism network. So journalists that are increasingly being trained and skilled with working with data and to make stories out of actual driven research through data. What is her perspective in the discussion we are just having? So we have seen that data are an important element in order to understand the phenomenon of disinformation, is an important element in order to react to the phenomenon, to expose risks around specific narratives. What is the perspective of the data journalism network in this context? Chiara, it is for you the floor now.
Thank you, Paolo. I hope you can hear me well.
No, we do very well.
Great. And I hope you can also see my slide, my PowerPoint. So actually, I'd like to start with a very brief introduction of the European Data Journalism Network that I have the honor to represent here. So it's
I'm sorry to interrupt you a second. We can see you well, we can hear you very well, but we cannot see your slides.
Okay, let's try then once again.
Oh.
Can you see it now?
It is, yes, half of the slide appears on my screen.
Okay, just 1 second. I need to put the full screen mode on. Does it work now?
Now it's good.
Okay, great.
Thank you.
You're very welcome. The European Data Journalism Network, we are a network of independent media outlets, very diverse. It's based in different countries, and we aim at testing how data journalism can be a tool to better explain Europe and European stories to local audiences across Europe. We do work in a very collaborative way, and we try to have transnational scope when we discuss about European affairs. In our work, of course, we do work with data. So I try to reformulate the question that I think it's relevant for my intervention here. How can data journalism help counter disinformation? To unpack this question in some other questions. So first of all, we all discussed about how COVID crisis has changed the landscape and the situation in which we all work. So what has COVID-19 told us about data and about the media? And then, is it true, the assumption that if you use data, you are necessarily more fact-based, more true, and closer to truth or not? And then another question I'd like to address is, how does data journalism enable collaboration between researchers and journalists? Misinformation, disinformation, this is all a very complex issue, and there is no unique or easy solution, and collaboration is very much needed. And then, can we data journalists or the European data journalism community, in doing its journalistic work, also foster resilience against disinformation, and maybe even empower, let us feel less powerlessness, empower democratic engagement in search of an impact? And my final question would be then, why is it worth supporting this European data journalism community, which is not overlapping or entirely defined by the EDG-net, of course. There is a much broader community we are very much inspired from and be glad to be part of. So I think Marc, in his intervention, pointed out how much COVID stressed the importance of trustworthy news and how this also brought readers back to trust in media, searching for trustworthy media sources. Actually, I've found quite interesting reading these Niemann reports, analyzing how, at least in some countries, among which Italy and Spain, coronavirus was reflected or impacted negatively trust in the media. And in this report that was released in March, actually one of the best scoring media in terms of trust and actually in gaining new subscribers and new attention was Il Post, a native online media. And there was a very important role also played by a local news outlet, not surprisingly based in Bergamo, where a data journalist, Isaia Ivernizzi, really made a huge service to his community. Also often fighting actually with official numbers released by the region, basically, about COVID. So in reflecting what was the impact that COVID had on the role also of data, we see that we were flooded with data, but how relevant were they? How did the data that were discussed daily really help people understand and grasp what was going on. We must say that in most cases, how the media covered these data were not really satisfying for readers and contributed to confusions. Of course, I mean, at the same time, and this is just to say that we don't want to mystify the fact that using data means being necessarily true. You can very much lie with data and produce disinformation, or you can misinterpret data and contribute to misinformation. But of course, you also have a unique opportunity, we believe, and that's why we are so much committed in doing what we are doing. You have a unique opportunity also to explain facts better, to overcome one problem that we saw in the data and that I will discuss in a minute, meaning looking at a phenomena solely through a national lens, and also using data really to build trust, being transparent about the methodology that you use, trying to address readers and embark the readers in a journey together with you as an author, as a newsroom, in learning how to read data, how to interpret data, how you can approach different questions using different data, and so on. So what is really key is data literacy and data ethics. This is an opportunity that doing data journalism brings with itself, and also a challenge. On one hand, the great focus we had on data during COVID pandemic also highlighted the usefulness of using visualization, not just as a nice graphic element. It's not just about aesthetic, or not really at all. It comes with great responsibility, and it is very important to focus on data visualization that are not necessarily beautiful, but that are clear and simple for anyone. And for anyone, I mean both the reader and possibly other journalists, to understand what you are showing there, to reuse what is there and adapt. This is something that we, within the European Data Journalism Network, really care about, and try to make it very easy, both in reusing the data visualization that we produce, to easily embed it, to customize it, not only to your own news outlets, but also to the specific context you are looking at. And this is because it's also important that a data-driven approach to news allow us, if you have good quality data, meaning raw data, high resolution data, to go down and to explain a global phenomenon, like it can be climate change or the pandemic, in bringing it down to a local level, showing the readers that it really relates to them. And some examples we had were related to climate change, or even to the pandemic. I see here one of the things about data literacy and data ethic, and about their importance, is that on one hand, data literacy refers to the fact that both within newsrooms and outside the newsrooms, we are not very familiar with data. Our capacity to understand that data are constructed is even less developed than our capacity to analyze and destructure textual content. So we believe that we really need to invest on training on data literacy, both for journalists and for the audience, and not just training. We also think that in the way that you do your data journalism, you can contribute as a journalist, as a newsroom, to the data literacy of the audience, and and how do you do that? On one hand, by being very clear about the methodology that you use. This is important, both because if as readers, we can say that we need to improve the way we read and understand data, it is also clear that there is the need for those that communicate those data to do much better work, both in terms of journalists and media, and also by institutions that release those data. This was a huge problem in Lombardy, for instance. How can you help this process throughout the journalism that you do? So we, within the European Data Journalism Network, we, as I said, we try to make as easy as possible to reuse the content that we use for our own stories, both in terms of data sets, of data sources. We try to be always very transparent about the data that we use, about the limitation that they have, about the methodology that we adopt, meaning how do you interrelate different data sources, for instance, or how do you work on those data? And we try to also make it easier for both the readers and the journalists to use those data, both by using interactive visualization. For instance, we did these two big investigation, let's say, about climate change in Europe. In the first case, the Europe 1 degree warmer, we try to we analyze how temperatures grew in 500 cities, and this was in 2018. And this year, we, using Copernicus data, we went even closer down to local municipality level, so covering about 40,000 European municipalities, thanks to the granular data offered by Copernicus. And why is it important to localize the data? Localizing data and localizing the phenomenon you are trying to explain through data is very important for two factors, for two reasons. On one hand, if you represent a phenomena like the pandemic, for instance, that appeared through local outbreaks, so you need not to use a national lens to tell the story. If you, for instance, you compare if you compare the situation in Italy and Germany at national level, the national average won't be very much telling, and actually it will be misrepresenting the reality. So there is a problem of misrepresentation. But on the other hand, it can be even more serious, the problem, because we had a lot of people not believing in COVID. And why was that the reason? If you look at how the pandemic impacted differently different regions, of course, for most of the Italian population, even if Italy was one of the most affected countries in Europe, in most of the in most of the country, people didn't have real experience. Their real reality was not so much affected by COVID. So if you show them in a very easy to grasp way that the phenomena was very different in different contexts, this helps people to understand why there is this mismatch between the story that is told and their own reality. And this could contribute to connecting the data you're exposing, the story that you're telling to the data with the real perception of the people in their normal lives, let's say. And this, the importance of the human angle in the story, when you also use data, and the human angle in the sense that trying to find ways to translate the data you are using in a way that can be intelligible for people. Like the same happened with data about climate change. If you tell people it's very serious that the temperature is increasing of 1 or 2 degrees, this is really hard to understand why just 1 or 2 degrees make a difference. But if you find ways to translate this in number of hot days or cold days, and showing that in a span of few decades, this number of hot or cold days has changed dramatically, or the number of rainy days, for instance, and so on. So it's really important when you work with data to try to connect with the audience and with the real experience of people. In order to do so, of course, there is the need of good quality data and storytelling competencies and capacity. And here is where the opportunity, the unique opportunity that data-driven journalism offers in terms of encouraging, facilitating, or making more often collaboration between researchers and journalists. This collaboration, how does it work in reality? On one hand, journalists and researchers work together, so journalists reach out to researchers in their preliminary research. We, almost all the investigation we carried out so far, we interviewed during the preliminary research experts, researchers, in order to understand what were the questions we should ask to the data that we would analyze and then visualize. And then, of course, this connection is very important also in terms of providing unique data sets to journalists that they can disseminate and through the journalistic coverage, through the story. And of course, when we address such complex topics as climate change, change in temperatures, or viruses, we need to be sure that we as data journalists, we understand, we interpret correctly the data that we are provided or that we are analyzing, and that we are correctly contextualizing them in the story we are about to write. And then, of course, also, as I said, within the European EDJNet, we really care about being transparent about the methodology that we use. In almost all pieces, long-term investigation, you will find a chapter on the methodology within the piece, and in some cases also on the Medium platform that we have to explain further or annotate more, give more insights on how we worked on data. His reflection on the methodology also is very important. It's a phase during which the exchange between researchers and journalists are particularly important. And I wanted also to say that a particularly good example of collaboration between journalists and researchers is the coverage of disinformation, actually. Doing data-driven reporting on topics like disinformation network or political advertisement on social media. In these cases, we saw that journalists maybe even use data before the academia and could provide, actually contributed a little bit on the agenda setting, even for research, because they were quicker because of how it works in journalism in academia, to use the API released by the platform and to analyze the data that was there, to realize that there were problems in the data that platform were providing. I totally agree with Marc that, voluntary commitment by platform is good, but some more compulsory obligation would be probably better. Also in terms of the quality of the data that they release. And I think that it's very encouraging to see that even if these two communities, researchers and journalists, are still different families, they have a different language. There can be tensions, for instance, because journalists need to simplify things. If you want to reach out and to be understandable for a wider audience, you need a degree of simplification that sometimes for researchers can be too much. But it's the way to go. And in terms of reporting about disinformation or political ads, within the network, we didn't focus really on these topics, but we did some work on that. specifically on political ads on Facebook ahead of the European Parliament election last year. And another form of collaboration, which is an interesting one, and we are about.
Sorry, you should wrap up because we are running out of time.
Yeah, I'll be very quick to my conclusion. I wanted just to mention that data sharing agreements between researchers and journalists, allowing journalists to have a look to data that researchers are working on, is another form, an interesting form of collaboration that we will explore, and that I think it would be interesting more in general to keep in mind when thinking of collaboration between the two communities. So to wrap up, why do I think that it is worth supporting data journalism and the European data journalism community, which once again doesn't, it's not only DigiNet, of course. Why is it important as a tool to counter disinformation, foster societal resilience against it? I think that the main reason for that is that data journalists have proven to be really a collaborative community, keen on sharing lessons learned, sharing doubts, working together, as Gregoire said, replacing or practicing more collaboration than just competition. And this exercise of self-reflection, even about the profession, is very important in the transformation that the media industry is going on. And as I'd say, the way to go to really rebuild connection and trust with the audience. I mean, the disintermediation that social media and all the digital transformation brought about is also very much about being able, as previous gatekeepers, be it journalists or researchers, to discuss and to treat people honestly and to believe in the capacity of the audience to follow, provided that, I mean, clarity and transparency is given on one hand, and that public education tools and investments are there to help people acquire the skills that they need, both in the profession and as audience. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chiara, so for the message that you conveyed to us that using data can help quality journalism, can actually help to build or to rebuild trust in media. I think we are approaching the end of this very interesting session. There is one last question that I would like to reply myself, if you allow me, because it's a rather complex question indeed. They say the dominant discourse on this topic is rather paternalistic. If something is not inciting to criminal behavior, why do we need to act so forcefully at all? Well, I would like to reply to these questions, of course, because it's a matter of policy, and it's a matter of policy that we have been construing in a multi-stakeholder approach in order to preserve the fundamental values that are characterizing our democratic societies. First of all, freedom of expression, steering clear from any form of censorship, but rather relying on collaboration between different stakeholders in order to establish trust on the media ecosystem. And I think collaboration is a word which has come out very often, actually in all interventions from Liz, from Marc, from Gregoire, from Chiara. All of you have been speaking about the importance of collaborations and transnational, international collaborations as being key to counter this phenomenon. Is this phenomenon really overestimated, as this question suggests? Well, I would say that it is not, for two reasons. First of all, because as we have seen, witnessing during the COVID crisis, there is a kind of continuum between false narratives, orchestrated disinformation campaigns, and then violent actions. Takes the example of 5G. It started as a video posted by an impersonated account claiming to be the Vodafone CEO, and then translated into arson attacks and threats to employees from telecom companies into violent actions. And the same could be said also about the origin of the COVID pandemic as being imputable to certain ethical minorities. You know, you start with false stories and you end up with hatred or with violent actions in the real physical world. This is the first reason. But the most fundamental, in my view, even more important reason is that is the issue of trust. Disinformation erodes trust in media, erodes trust in democratic institutions. It is aimed at sowing division, polarizing society, and by doing that, eliminates the very foundations of what democracy is relying on. The foundation being the ability of people to collaborate, the ability of people to know on the basis of which facts and which clearly expressed and transparent opinions the decisions are taken. And absent this transparency, absent this intelligibility of the information space, it is very policymaker to make correct choices and for citizens to be adherent to these choices in the future. So here we are talking about an endeavor that it is underpinning the future of our democracies. That's why the work, I think, that the speakers today have been witnesses with a very, down to the ground experiences, facing the phenomenon as it comes up on a daily basis, should reveal the importance of the overall arching architecture that has been put around this topic in order to, as a support for the European democracy. And with these words, I would simply recall that this action, this endeavor, it is not over. Far from there, we are learning lessons from the COVID crisis, from the infodemic that has been accompanying this crisis. The Commission has adopted, as you know, a communication that takes stock of what we have learned so far during the crisis. The communication was adopted on the 10th of June, but this is only one more step in a sequence of steps. The next will be the adoption of the European Democracy Action Plan. A public consultation has been launched actually yesterday, inviting all the interested parties to intervene in this very important debate. And the next autumn will see us again on open mood towards all the stakeholder concerns to reach the debate that will lead to conclusions at the end of November, probably, when the Action Plan on Democracy will be published. That, I think, that is there where the importance of our work lies, and that is why I don't think the threat of disinformation can ever be underestimated in the current circumstances. With this, I would like to thank very, very much Liz, Marc, Gregoire, Chiara for their very enriching interventions. And I would also thanks very much Andrea and everybody who has collaborated for bringing this series of sessions of the Connected Universities dedicated to the topic to a successful end. I've seen that we had many people connected and following on web stream our session. Around 200 people at a certain moment were connected. So that shows the interest of your discussion, for your contributions. And with that, I would like really to thank you again and to hope to say that I hope to see you in person and not virtually as soon as possible. Andrea, I don't know whether you want to give a conclusive remark from your side or whether we close here.
Thank you so much to all of you. Thanks to the speakers, to the participants for the very engaging questions and for the discussions. And stay tuned because Connect University is coming back in September with lots of fascinating sessions. Thanks so much again to all of you.
Bye. Bye to everybody.
Bye-bye.